into the woods, where so many folk tales and fables happen. Many of them signed by the brothers Grimm, collected in sagas and fairy tales passed down to generations. But with changes and added meanings designed for their times. Stories of the enchanted, of witches, and of knights in shining armor. Come into the forest and experience wonderful things. You may meet evil, or find your fortune. But what really lies behind the dreadful roar of the forest? For there is always a truth. In the ancient lore and fables, there is a kernel of reality. We all know it. Yet the forest keeps its mystery and gives nothing away. More than 200 years ago, two brothers came under the forest spell. They told fantastic stories from the past that also stood for their present. Where Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm grew up in Germany, villages and towns were once surrounded by forests that stretched across Central Europe. Here, people lived both with and from nature. But there was hunger and poverty. Nobles ruled with a heavy hand, enslaving and exploiting their subjects, while they lived in luxury. Unable to feed their children, pauper parents were forced to abandon them in the forest. Stories of rich and poor, fortune and misfortune populate the pages of folk tales. Long before the Grimms, people had many beliefs, but little knowledge. Their forest was a secret and perilous place. Farmers and their families who couldn't identify the cries of animals at dusk or at night fell prey to fear. The play of light and shadow conjured a fine variety of magical creatures. A perfect place for mythical stories to be told. One of the Grimm's most famous fables is that of Red Riding Hood. They rewrote a story Charles Perrault first composed in France at the end of the 17th century. Little Red Riding Hood is sent into the woods by her mother to visit her sick grandmother with a present of cakes and wine. On the way there, she meets the big bad wolf. He has deadly designs on both her and her grandmother. The wolf lures the girl deeper and deeper into the woods. Then he whisks away and eats her grandmother. And when Little Red Riding Hood finally reaches the house, he eats her too. The moral of the story? The world is a deep, dark forest, home of evil. Be ever on your guard. Never trust a stranger. In Charles Perrault's tale, the wolf was clearly an evil human. But for the brothers Grimm, the evil came from the animal, the beast. A voracious loner. And yet, real wolves are family-oriented, living and hunting together in a pack. A clan with clear roles and a chain of command. And the weaker members are looked after too. Wolves have their own distinctive body language. And they'll resolve most conflicts peacefully. But a little bit of rough and tumble may be necessary. For thousands of years, wolves were seen as the companions of the gods. To some, they were gods. It was the centuries of conversion to Christianity that created the devil wolf, linked to every pagan ritual that survived. Such is the strength of superstition that we still believe in the big bad wolf. Apparently harmless fairy tales like Little Red Riding Hood still hold us in their grip today. But nature can also seed fantastic tales without resorting to animals. Bottomless lakes, mystic fountainheads and springs have been portals to another world since Celtic times. The old Germanic goddess Holdan lived in these sacred waters. She had power over the weather and the seasons. She could even turn water into ice. For the brothers Grimm, she was the Lady Holle. Her tale tells of two young girls who sprang into a fountain and found themselves in the cloud world. In their new life as serving girls, they shook out the quilts from high above, and so it snowed. Goldmarie worked so hard that it snowed profusely on earth. The Lady Holle rewarded her with a shower of gold. But lazy Pitchmarie was dunked in sticky tar. In fact, snow is important, protecting plants from the attacks of Jack Frost, all the way down to the roots, and warming the animals that winter within. Ah, but for the common people, winter was the hardest time of all. Few were those who could wade through deep snow to bag a boar. And that is why the hunter always commanded respect, in the community and in the tales of the brothers Grimm. In Little Red Riding Hood and The Wolf and Seven Kids, the bitter rivalry between wolf and hunter are central. And yet, the relations of human and wolf began so promisingly. Wolves certainly followed hunters, but not to eat them. The wolves soon learned that often something was left over after the hunt. And hunters that tackled boars and stags knew they had little to fear from a wolf. So, wolves and humans made common cause. Men discovered the rare intelligence of the wolves. Rivals became friends. Wolves evolved into dogs. Still a hunter's loyal companion. Ravens follow hunters and warriors too. They won their reputation as heralds of death because they were seen on every battlefield wherever there was carrion. In winter, flesh left over from the hunt is their main sustenance, though they're often forced to share with birds of prey. In Grimm's fairy tales, ravens often join witches and wizards, or are themselves enchanted people. In their story, The Raven, an angry queen turns her daughter into the blackest of birds, but one that can talk. She tells the prince how the spell can be broken, and he rescues her. The more you observe ravens, the more you see how well the world's biggest songbirds communicate, and how fast they learn. End of winter is the start of the mating season. This spring banquet is the perfect marriage exchange with all its rituals. Here, ravens find their lifelong partners. Mutual grooming and beak stroking will help them live happily ever after. Stories all around the world celebrate the intelligence of these birds, black as pitch. No wonder gods and kings seek out raven wisdom. Many Grimm's tales speak of sunken treasure deep in the bed of a lake, a pond, or a spring. The best known is Iron Heinrich, the Frog King. As she played, a princess dropped her golden ball into a deep well. In her despair, she asked a frog for help. He retrieved her treasure and demanded a kiss in exchange. I think we know the rest. But what could be the truth behind this story? In times of war, people sank their gold and silver coins in wells or mill ponds to hide them from plunderers. But most peasants couldn't swim, and so the treasure was lost forever. Sometimes it could be seen glimmering far below. But more often it was the glittering scales of the fishes or the shimmer of mother of pearl. Reflecting and refracting the sun, flashing and sparkling. Nimble, delicate shadows glide past. Bubbles follow like strings of pearls. These are no fish, but they can dive and swim. Constantly taking a nibble at the treasure. Might river otters be the model for the mermaids who watched over the booty and lured humans into the depths? One of the Grimm's tales is called The Nixie of the Mill Pond. A water spirit helps a miller in peril and demands his son as her reward. For a long time, the miller hides his son from the Nixie. But after many years, the mermaid captures the young man. This story has a happy ending. A wise woman changes him momentarily into a frog, just long enough to escape. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm never ceased playing with the imagination of their readers. Bogs as places of evil. Toad's golden eyes look deep into people's souls. Haughty, witchy creatures, masters of metamorphosis. Endless pearl strings hang from the water plants. What they release into the water aren't little toads, but fish. Soon, however, the tail disappears and little legs grow. Is it sorcery? Magic? And finally, as a finished toad, landfall. Toads were long seen as midwives, watching over treasure or protecting homes. Only later did their poison warts make them sorcerers' companions. For the Grimms, toads and frogs are the symbols of transformation. So in The Frog King, the clammy green amphibian regains his princely human shape through a kiss. But this has taken us away from the forest. Huge, enchanted, and dangerous, it plays a crucial role in almost half of the 210 children's and household tales. Emperors owned the forests in the Middle Ages, protecting the game, managing the timber. Deer and wild boar thrived in enormous numbers. With their impressive antlers, red deer were kings of the forest. Each spring, their antlers grow anew, ever larger. In the summer, majestic stags wander through forests and fields together. Suddenly, in autumn, they face off as rivals for the females. Their crown of antlers made red and fallow deer royal game, hunted only by the aristocracy. The king and his entourage rode out to hounds in the forest. He who bagged a wild boar with the special boar spear was considered especially bold. Many of the forests were crisscrossed by marshes and bogs. Hunters would shun these perilous places. The common people weren't allowed to hunt at all, on pain of severest punishment. That meant poaching in the marshes was their only chance. No horseman would follow them there. A wild boar fed a village for several days. The animals knew safe routes twixt marsh and bogs. For a poacher, however, this could mean the end. Swallowed up in bottomless bogs, never to be seen again. Marshlands were a place of doom and perdition, home of the will-o'-the-wisp, luring men to their deaths. And yet, the marshes have a positive, magical side. They support rather than destroy life. Many plants and animals find the marshlands very much to their liking. Bears are familiar with the healing qualities of a peat bath. There were brown bears throughout Central Europe until the 15th century, and they constantly appear in Grimm's fairy tales. The bear isn't in the same league as the wolf for evil. Bruno is good-natured, sometimes grumpy, and a little clumsy. Standing on his hind legs makes him seem human-like, which is why in the fables he so often appears as a human turned into an animal. One of the less well-known stories is The Wren and the Bear. One summer's day, a bear and a wolf went out walking in the woods. The bear heard the wren singing and asked the wolf who it was. The wolf took advantage of the bear's ignorance and said, "It's the king of the birds. We must bow down before him." But when the bear asked to see the palace, he was disappointed, and he insulted the royal family. The wren demanded satisfaction and called on every flying creature to battle against the animals that walk on the ground. The fox's raised tail was to launch the four-pawed creature's attack. But just before the moment came, a hornet stung the fox, and he fled the field. And thus, the supposedly weaker side won. This story shows a profound understanding of nature. The bear may be strong, but the wolf is clever. In nature, wolves and bears do compete for the same prey, and the wolves often win. Dusk is the hour of the will-o'-the-wisps, whose glimmering lights will lead you astray. Bogs and marshes are a terrifying place. Only the night is worse. In the ivory glow of the moon, contours soften and imagination runs riot. The boy who set out to learn fear tells of a confident young lad who seeks the unknown horrors of the night. He desires nothing more than to tremble with terror. He must spend 3 fright nights in a haunted castle. If he succeeds, the princess, the castle, and the treasure will be his. Night after night, the haunting spirits do their very worst. But the boy simply feels no fear, and so he passes the test. Nighttime was the time of werewolves and vampires. Animals that could find their way in pitch darkness were very frightening. People didn't understand that the animals' sight and sense of smell were so much more sensitive than theirs. And bats' ultrasonic aerobatics seemed like pure black magic. Magic it isn't, but a true miracle of nature. One of the Grimm's most famous tales is that of Snow White. In the story, her stepmother is jealous of her beauty. She orders a hunter to take Snow White into the woods and kill her there. But he can't bring himself to do it, and she's rescued by the 7 dwarves. Every day the dwarves walk deep into the mountains to dig for treasure. Their mines have veins of gold, silver, and gemstones. In truth, it helped to be little, to find jewels in caves and dig down ever deeper into the mountains. In the Grimm's story, the dwarves are the guardians of the mountain's treasures. In the real world, they glittered and sparkled in the royal treasuries. In many Grimm's tales, the hero is promised the princess's hand and half the kingdom. And in the Middle Ages, there were hundreds of kingdoms to choose from. In those days, land counted for much more than money and jewelry. Most of the tasks the heroes had to perform seemed impossible. And yet countless princes, humble millers' boys, or valiant little tailors were ready to give it a go. The little tailor even wore a belt that said, "7 with 1 blow." Only he knew that the 7 in question were the flies he swatted on his morning toast. Well, that's exactly the kind of hero a king could use. Because, of course, there were wild animals and even giants in his forests that must be defeated at all costs. And for this too, the reward would be the king's daughter and half his realm. A unicorn is doing great damage in the woods, says the king. A fully grown European bison weighs 500 kilos. Even if he has only one horn, it's inadvisable to cross him. The valiant little tailor has his work cut out to tame the raging unicorn. With a bullfighter's speed and skill, he corners the animal. The unicorn rushes at him to impale him. But it rams its horn into a tree, and so the tailor captures him. But instead of the reward he'd promised, the king sends the plucky fellow into the forest again. A wild boar is running amok there. Anyone who's seen a hog fighting can imagine just how dangerous the task is. Nearly 2 meters long, weighing 200 kilos, a boar has sharp, curved tusks that can inflict the gravest injuries. When the crafty little tailor subdues this dangerous animal too, the king still fails to keep his word and sends him into the forest a third time. 2 giants are rampaging there. They must be vanquished. As the tailor enters the forest, he craftily makes the 2 giants attack each other, turning the tables on the powerful. Rearing on their hind legs, brown bears can stretch up to 2 meters, giants wrestling like humans. Giants rampaged in the mountains too, or so people long believed. Who else could have moved these rocks and hewn them into colossal sculptures? One of the Grimm sagas tells of the Devil's Wall. Here, in Germany's Harz Mountains. It's more than 20 kilometers long. God and the devil argued over who owned the earth. The devil would win the Harz Mountains if he could finish the boundary wall before the first cock crow. With just one more rock to go, the cock crowed, and the devil furiously destroyed his whole night's work. Thousands of years before Satan was given the credit, these imposing rocks were a place of ritual and sacrifice for the Germanic gods. But then the church reclaimed all the old cult locations and pagan sites. And obliterated the heathen memories. The dark days of Christianization turned gods into devils, druids into evil wizards, and wise women into witches. Of all the Grimm's tales of witches, the story of Hansel and Gretel must be the best known. The children's parents were so desperately poor that they decided, with a heavy heart, to abandon Hansel and Gretel in the forest. Hansel learned of their plan and marked the way with peas to lead them back home. But the birds ate the peas, and the children got more and more lost. They came upon a house in the middle of the forest. Its walls were made of the finest sweets. Famished, Hansel and Gretel fell into the witch's trap. 3,000 years ago, Celts and Germans had a word, Hektese. It meant a clever, wise woman. But today, that word makes us think of hex or hag. In truth, the world's oldest religions were based in nature. In knowledge that grew from the observation of heaven and earth. The transition from day to night, the path of the sun, the moon, and the stars. The magical apparitions of the heavens. Those wise women and men could make predictions from the flights of birds, the growth of trees, and the changing of the seasons. Ancient wisdoms were passed down from generation to generation. The Hektese and the Druids decided when it was time to hunt, time to sow, and to reap. That meant everything for people living in all-powerful nature. The wise women knew the secret healing powers of plants. Wild garlic was a popular healing herb, but it had poisonous neighbors. The leaves of lily of the valley and autumn crocus are very similar, and they can be deadly. In small doses, bracken fern helps relieve burns and scalds, rheumatism, and even warts. But used wrongly, it can cause serious suffering. Even delicate and beautiful wood anemones are poisonous if eaten. Their deep knowledge seemed to give healers powers over life and death. Berries and mushrooms. Some taste good, others are extremely poisonous. Disaster and salvation so close together. As in the tale of Snow White. Again and again the evil queen tried to poison the beautiful princess, but in the end, Snow White was rescued by her prince. Belladonna, deadly nightshade, is the classic poisonous plant. Its healing properties against convulsions are just as powerful. In German, mistletoe is also known as druid's foot and witch's broom. The spindle tree is poisonous too, but in the correct dose, both can lower blood pressure and ease heart problems. This was a whole universe of knowledge. A skillful healer meant a healthy, strong community. Children today know that these penny bun mushrooms can be eaten, and these, fly agaric, are poisonous. For a long time, mushrooms were a staple part of the diet. Just as with berries, there was always the danger of confusion and mistaken identity. Penny buns are not the only mushrooms with a cap and a markedly thick stalk. Its similar relative, Satan's mushroom, is highly toxic. The Scarlatina bolete turns black when it's injured, but it's still edible. There are more than 100 edible fungi. If you know what you're looking for, you can live off them almost the whole of the year. You can't eat the bird's nest fungi, but you can read the future from it. The more eggs in the nest, the more prosperous the coming year will be. In Hansel and Gretel's happy ending, the wicked witch winds up shoved in the oven and burned to death. And the children return to their parents, loaded with treasure. Many of the Grimm's stories were inspired by the hero sagas of Siegfried the Dragon Slayer. For contemporaries of the Grimms, Siegfried had a historical model. Hermann, Prince of the Cherusci. At a legendary battle, Germans versus the Romans in the Teutoburg forest, Hermann had annihilated 3 Roman legions. The supposedly superior civilized Romans were overwhelmed by a far smaller force of barbarians. The Roman historian Dio described the battle thus: "The mountains were so full of chasms and the trees so close together, the Romans struggled to fight their way through. A forest full of terrors, especially to Romans spoiled by the southern sun." The shock defeat of the superpower Rome created the legend of the German forest. For the Germans, the sacred seat of their gods. Like Hermann, Siegfried possessed seemingly superhuman strength, together with boundless courage and bravery. Killing a dragon, he became almost invulnerable and brought back a great treasure. He could be seen as the first mythological knight. The Middle Ages were the heyday of the knights. Their castles ruled over the countryside, perched invulnerably on mountain tops and outcrops. The knights were warriors fighting for their monarch or the church. They trained for the role from childhood. There are so many knightly sagas among the Grimm's tales. One of them is the dragon at the well. At the foot of Castle Frankenstein was a well. In it lived a voracious dragon. The people could only take water after sacrificing a sheep to it. Finally, the knight of the castle defeated the monster, but the creature was poisonous, and the brave knight had to leave this life. Each of these stories has a kernel, a grain of truth, for still today there is a little dragon that may not be deadly but is poisonous. Fire salamanders live in springs or along small brooks. A secretion from its skin glands causes nasty itching. More illustrations of dragons showed scales, long clawed paws, dorsal and cranial spines. And when the bones of dinosaurs were first found, it seemed the case for dragons was conclusive. They had mini dragons then, as we have today. Reptiles like the sand lizard. And so the fearless knights of fairy tales battled against foes that poetic license has massively magnified. A knight's lands might include great swathes of forest, with fields and villages. He ruled over peasants and tradesmen, deciding what weapons would be fashioned, how much food produced. Much came from nature. When acorns, beechnuts, and wild fruit rained down from the trees, the animals of the forest lay on their winter fat. What's good for forest animals is good for farm animals too. The peasants knew the value of the rich food and drove their sheep into the forest. The deer were no competition, but there was a dangerous predator. Occasionally wolves would near one of the flocks. Easier to hunt sheep than stags or wild boar. And when the shepherds were village children, the pickings were easy. Is that the truth behind Little Red Riding Hood? One of the brothers' stories reminds us of this. The Wolf and the 7 Kids tells of a nanny goat living in the middle of the forest with her 7 children. When she leaves the house, she warns the young to let no one in. But the wolf sneaks in and eats all the kids, except one. In this fairy tale, the mother defeats the wolf and saves all the kids. Wolves are not as big or as strong as bears or lions, so they tend to attack weak and ill animals that can't defend themselves. They don't hunt people. Today, many see wolves as they really are, neither man-eaters nor cuddly pets, but predators that simply have their place in nature. They're very social animals, tenderly looking after their young as a clan. But what of Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm? How did they experience the forest? What made it holy, mysterious, and legendary for them? By the Grimm's day in the early 19th century, the forest had already shrunk to small patches. It had been cleared to make homes and stables and burned in innumerable hearths. Broad fields and pastures now dominated the landscape. The wild, romantic days of yore seemed gone forever. And that's one reason the brothers captured the legends and sagas of the forest. They were linking the past and the present, just as everything was changing so fast. For ancient forests alter our awareness of time and of place. They span the centuries while their branches reach all the way up to heaven. Trees once nourished the imagination, and they still do. Nature itself creates the greatest miracles and knows the best stories. They only have to be told.